So it's been 1 year since I moved into this apartment and 1 year since I started living alone. I've been in a state of reflection lately and thought I would share these thoughts with you along with some advice on living alone and what comes with it. I just made myself a cup of tea in this ginormous mug I thrifted. I hope you're gonna get cozy too because it's late summer right now and one of my favorite times of the year. You know, the trees are just starting to change. It's a little chillier out these mornings and everything feels nice because it's slowing down. I guess as well, getting started into this video, I should probably inform you on why I ended up living alone. So going through a quick timeline, I moved out of my parents' house when I was on the cusp of 18 and 19. I was still pretty young, but my parents were going to start charging me rent. And because we lived out in the middle of nowhere, out in the countryside, it didn't make sense for me to both pay them rent and pay a super expensive gas bill every month. My gas bill was between $500 and $600, which was a lot, especially for 2017 when the economy was even cheaper than it is now. So yeah, I then moved to the city and started my journey with roommates. And I had a lot of horrible times with them. Had to go to therapy for it. This isn't an anti-roommate video by any means. I think there's a time and place for them, and I'm glad I went through my experience with roommates. But the kind of horror stories you hear about them is what happened to me. Some criminal stuff, some abusive stuff. I had to move from lots of situations quickly and unexpectedly for my safety. I did that for a few years and then ended up in one house with a much better living situation overall. The last place I lived is where basically all of my old videos are filmed. I was there for 4 years and the last 3 years lived with one specific person. And this person, we started off as coworkers and moved in together at that time. A weird scenario, we didn't know each other super well, but we got along. I needed a roommate, they wanted to move out of their place. So we lived together as coworkers and eventually both left the job we were in, so we were just friends. And then we weren't just friends, we started dating at some point, which I know already, I know it's against the rules. We did that and then it didn't work out. We went through a breakup and continued living together as exes. And this is because in 2022 and 2023, the housing market got even more ridiculous than it had been. There wasn't really an option to move out. And I can't speak on their experience living with me, but for myself, I know it was rough. I wasn't the one who did the breakup, so it kind of felt like time slowed down. It took longer to process everything, took longer for emotions to settle. And then a year ago, I kind of just hit a point where even though I wasn't financially ready, I didn't want to be someone who kept living with their ex. I felt like a walking red flag anytime I went on dates because I would disclose to the people I was getting to know that I was living with them. It didn't feel fair if I didn't. And as soon as the words left my mouth that I was living with my ex, it didn't feel right. I just had to move. And so I started looking. I viewed a lot of places until I found this one, but when I did, I fell in love. It's tiny, but beautiful, and I have a really lovely deck. It was above my price budget. Just to be transparent, I wasn't looking for a place to live over $800, and the current place I live is $850. So I didn't love that, but it felt like I could kind of push that threshold in order to have a fulfilling home. What I ended up doing for the first 2 months was not have Wi-Fi. I had zero internet and I had to go to cafes and use the internet at my work, to do anything. It was harder to do the more time passed. So eventually I left a note in my neighbor's mailbox that was like, hey, I moved in a couple months ago and haven't had Wi-Fi. I'm just wondering if yours can reach my suite. Can I swing you $25 a month for it? I left my phone number and ended up getting a text from him the next day or so. And he was down to try it out. We did, it worked. So in total, my rent ended up coming to $875 a month. And even though that was over my budget, I have found ways to financially make that work, which does take us into my first point about living alone. The biggest downside to it all is that it's expensive. It will never be cheaper to live on your own versus with someone else. I live in the tiniest option possible. You know, it's called a bachelor suite or a studio suite. That means I have a kitchen, one bathroom, and one room. The room is both my living room and my bedroom. I'm paying roughly double what I had been when I lived with one other person in a whole house. So as you go up to a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom as a single living person, it just gets more and more expensive. And a big thing I want to mention, which was something that I never knew, was that having a pet from a cat or bigger will severely impact how much rent you're paying. Honestly, if I didn't have my cat Frankie, I would have been able to move out of the house with my ex within the next week. There are definitely affordable apartments for low-income people, but because they're marketed for low income, I don't even know how to get into this without going into a whole political tirade on landlords. But essentially, there's a lot of belief that if you're low income, you shouldn't have a pet, you shouldn't have a car, you should be selling all of your assets so you can save money. And although there is some math to that, there is no humanity to it. You know, a pet is a very good companion. It is great for your mental health. So if low income people can find ways to take care of their animals, I think they should have them. And that isn't a popular belief. I tried negotiating with so many landlords on my cat. I would send a picture of her, say she's a really well-behaved cat, she doesn't scratch furniture, I can give you a pet reference, I can give you a pet deposit, and they were just ruthless. They didn't care. And I'm not exaggerating at all. Every pet-friendly apartment and home cost $800 more a month. The prices I commonly saw were $600 for a pet-free apartment suite or $1,200 for a pet-friendly apartment suite. Absolutely ridiculous. I had to negotiate with my landlord of this place as well, but luckily she has cats of her own and she really likes cats, so we figured out something there and made it work. To talk a bit more about how I can financially sustain to live alone, I really cut back my spending as much as I could. I genuinely don't buy that much. Like, the only thing I buy new, genuinely, is books. Other than that, I am thrifting things and ultimately still thrifting selectively. And another way I've stayed on top of my finances is by not eating out anymore. I only really do if I have a coupon to. Delivery services as well as restaurants have gotten so expensive that it just isn't realistic for me to do if I can't have a deal on it. So I cook a lot more and get groceries more frequently. And even with that, like, I'd be comparing deals in the grocery store. I really wasn't someone who did that before, but you gotta sometimes. Other small changes is that I'm walking more places compared to driving, and I've been selling more art just to get some extra cash. But really, all these little things contributing to saving money don't negatively impact my life. It's just different. It's altered. And the amount of pros there are to living alone really outweighs it all too. An obvious point to this is the ability to curate your space. But for me, it has less to do with the aesthetic value of it all and more to do what I can learn about myself in what I like and what makes me feel good. Like, for example, once I moved into here, I really started gravitating towards more wood pieces, like the ones behind me. Yes, this can better help me to find new furniture, but it also tells me that I really like being around elements of nature. It reinforces my belief around the importance of being outside. It reminds me to go on more picnics and hikes, and that's just kind of scratching the surface. And that also kind of brings me into my next point, which is about sexuality. Living alone does give you more space to masturbate, but it's a little bit more than that, okay? It gives you more intimacy with your body. You might have heard the phrase, you either have a naked neighbor or you are the naked neighbor. I am the naked neighbor. I walk around in my underwear so much, but it is really a good thing for me. Like, I've talked about it before. I have diagnosed body dysmorphia. That shit gets weird sometimes. You know, I don't always know what I look like. But something I've started doing since living in this apartment was not focusing on figuring out what I look like, but instead really understanding what the movements of my body feels like. And so the ability to be more exposed, to dance in my underwear or eat food while sitting on the floor, be in my bed and just be flesh, it's cultivated something very healing for me. Tying into that point as well, as someone who lives with chronic pain and disability, I do have more space to be in pain and be disabled. And what I mean by that is I've always felt like I need to contain it in my room when I've had flare-ups. I couldn't be around my roommates because what ended up happening was I would mitigate their feelings towards seeing my pain. Suddenly, I had to take care of myself as well as them. And that's a lot to put on somebody. And so the ability to fully engage with the pain and the sorrow that comes with a flare-up, it helps me move through it quicker. And at the end of the day, I don't want those kinds of emotions to linger. In fear of sounding just horribly traumatized, I have one more point to do with all of this. It has to do with shame. When I was going to therapy, I was diagnosed with 2 types of trauma, which was PTSD as well as trauma shame. The latter means I take on a lot of shame and guilt, whether I need to or not. It's just a reaction that my nervous system goes to. And one of the worries I had when moving out by myself was that I was going to be super messy. I felt like I had been driven by shame to clean my space. Like, what does it say about me if I leave too many dishes around? You know, I was so unnecessarily anxious about people thinking I was messy. And obviously, that has to do with some childhood links, but we're not getting into that. To my pleasant surprise, living alone has actually reversed those effects of messiness. I genuinely do keep my space very clean, and I find myself wanting to because I love it so much. Since everything else in my life has gotten easier, such as my body dysmorphia and my depression, things like trauma shame is also lifting a little bit. So yeah, I don't feel like a messy person, and when I do have small messes around the house when someone comes to visit me, it has actually been a good exercise and tool for me to move past the shame I feel and to just let it be. And I think that takes me into my next note as well, which is I feel like I have more space for friendship and love here. I know that sounds cheesy, but I feel like I need to mention this because the biggest misconception sold to me about living alone was that I would feel lonely. That's what people said was the biggest con, but I don't. I feel the least lonely I ever have. I'm gonna do my best to explain this, but in my last house, the routine I went through was having an 8-hour shift at work and seeing so many people, just boom, boom, interacting with customers and clients for a long time. And then I would come home and I would talk with my roommate for a while. We'd make supper together. And then some nights I would catch up with family or friends, or I'd go on dates. And so it made it that the most solitude I had was when I was sleeping. And it was exhausting. Whereas now, the only big socializing moments is work. And outside of that, I have so much more authority over my space and when I choose to leave it. I can recharge whenever, and I can invite people over at the most random parts of the day. Sometimes my partner comes over to have lunch with me, and we'll just nap afterwards. It all feels very balanced and a lot easier to set boundaries with people now. And then I would say the final reason that I've really loved living alone is that there's more opportunities to be creative. If my cat has zoomies and wakes me up at 5 a.m., I can and often will just start painting in the kitchen. I can also blast annoying music in the shower. Like, I don't know if anyone's felt this, but you know those earworm songs that you want to listen to over and over again? Whenever I've showered, I've never felt like I can do that. Like, I can put on one song 8 times when my roommate's listening to it as well. That's annoying. I don't want to be annoying. But do you know how many times an amazing song has been released and I have done that now in the shower? Another thing too is I do self-therapy, which I don't know how often I should keep explaining what this is. I don't know how many people watch all my videos, but essentially I set up my camera the way it is now and I just talk to it. I talk to it as if it's my therapist. And I don't do anything with the footage. I just keep it in a USB somewhere, but it helps me to really verbalize whatever I'm going through. I found it very helpful to do alongside journaling. I kind of feel like doing just one or the other isn't enough, but having both helps me maintain my mental health and keep me moving forward. And when I lived with roommates, I had one day of the week that I could do self-therapy. It was a Tuesday. It was the only day that I was home when my roommate was working. And yes, scheduling and therapy can work. You know, that's literally how traditional therapy works. But something I've really liked is having the freedom to do it whenever. Sometimes I'll just be making lunch and doing self-therapy. I'll even do it when I first wake up and my bangs are going in all sorts of directions. It really helps to regulate everything, and the flexibility to do that whenever is something I need right now in my life, and I'm glad I have it. So yeah, I would say those are the main points. This wasn't a video I ever thought I would make upon living by myself, but I just realized there is so much more to it than what people say there is. I feel like when people tried to give me advice, it was useless. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, it just didn't matter. I hope this did for you. I'm planning to move in with my partner in the next year or so. So these experiences I'm having have a timeline. And this is why I was already reflecting on all this. I'm trying to really soak in this aloneness while I can and be grateful for it thus far. My tea has gone cold, so I'm gonna end this here. Thank you as always for watching and supporting me, and I will see you next week. Bye.